you probably have a fair idea who supplies your tap water, but what do you know about who they really are? Northumbrian Water sounds nice and local, but when you pay the bill, you may be surprised to learn that the profits leach away to the other side of the world, and the taxman is left feeling a little dry. You can't ignore Northumbrian Water. With its 29 reservoirs, 35 treatment works, 269 pumping stations, 10,000 miles of water mains and similar number of sewers. Few can deny its importance. After all, it delivers clean water and takes all the nasty stuff away from the homes of 2.7 million people in the northeast. So who owns this part of the northeast's family silver? And where do our direct debits go? Do you know who owned it?
Probably the French.
Just assumed it's a company of its own.
No idea.
Let me give a few clues. The owner lives here, Hong Kong. He owns this and this, has invested in this and this. He's the richest man in Asia. In fact, he's the 17th richest man in the world, worth an estimated £20 billion. He's Li Ka-Shing. So why should anyone care who owns Northumbrian Water? Well, you might be paying one of their bills, on average £364 a year. Now that brings in a massive £800 million in revenue. Then there are the jobs, 1,600 staff, making it one of the biggest in the northeast. And when you think about the jobs that depend on it, the money it raises, all these assets, that puts Li Ka-Shing in the top league in riches. Names like Ashley, Duke of Northumberland. Only like them, no one's heard of him. So exactly who is Li Ka-Shing? Our first clue is the Atlantic. Forbes magazine has spent a generation finding out about the richest people in the world.
Mr. Li has one of the most extraordinary stories of all of our world billionaires. He and his family had to flee China when he was 12. His father died a couple of years after. His father had been a principal back in mainland China. And he really had to start working. He dropped out of school and at age 15 started to work to help support his family.
And there's another image that Mr. Li likes to promote, that of someone who's careful with money. For example, he takes pride in wearing a cheap $50 Seiko watch. And in the past, that thriftiness has also extended to his appearance.
It took years for him to have a decent haircut. And it was only after his wife passed away and he got a girlfriend that he was finally convinced to have some sort of, decent haircut. But in terms of how he lives behind closed doors in Hong Kong, he's up there in his penthouse, he's got a swimming pool up on the roof, and he lives pretty well. Li Ka-Shing's first business was making plastic flowers, becoming the biggest manufacturer in Asia. Since then, his business interests extend to telecommunications, ports, the internet and property. He's now worth £20 billion and has even set out a charitable foundation. So is that generosity going to extend to Northumbrian Water's customers? And precisely why, of all the things Li could have bought in the world, why did he buy a slice of the northeast in 2011?
The three big attractions are: firstly, it's an essential service. Secondly, it's a monopoly. It's a natural monopoly. You don't build competing water systems. The third thing is that the UK government provides a regulatory environment which most people think of as protecting the consumer, but in fact the core objective of the regulatory environment is to ensure that the companies continue to make enough profit so that they're profitably enough to want to carry on investing.
It's 25 years since the water industry privatised, and Li Ka-Shing is just the latest in a string of owners. But what do customers think? Well, I'm at the Water Consumer Council to find out.
Generally, Northumbrian Water comes out pretty well in that research. When it comes to satisfaction with services, they're usually top of the league, if there was such a league.
So Northumbrian Water comes out quite well in detail.
Absolutely.
But what about bills you pay? If you have a sneaky suspicion they've been up, then you're right. Back in 1989, the average water bill, in today's money, was £248. In the 1990s, prices shot up. They levelled off a bit, back, and then after the millennium, forged ahead once more. So now, the average water bill is £364. That's 50% more in real terms than when a taxpayer owned the water company. But that's not the only difference between private and public ownership. In the last 2 years, Northumbrian Water made over £630 million in profit. They paid on average less than 10% in tax. Compare that to the 20% corporation tax you might expect.
We're being ripped off in the sense that if Northumbrian Water was paying a proper level of taxes, we could pay less taxes.
So how do they manage that? Through debt. Mr. Li makes Northumbrian Water borrow £1 billion from him. In normal circumstances, Northumbrian Water would pay tax on its loan to the tune of millions, but not if it's routed through a tax haven like the Channel Islands. Then there's nothing to pay. So more profit for Mr. Li.
He has armies of lawyers and accountants who are perennially at the absolute bleeding edge of what is legally possible. And he, has relationships with some of the most aggressive deal structuring organisations in the world.
The tax avoidance scheme Northumbrian Water and Li Ka-Shing is using is not illegal, and although the government did look at closing the loophole, they decided not to the frustration of some.
This is a tax scam. No wonder he's the world's ninth richest person. We're making him the world's ninth richest person. I think this is a scandal.
The government has really dragged its feet on tax loopholes generally, but on the water industry it seems to have completely been blindsided by the scale of tax avoidance that has gone on. Eventually the government's going to have to act on this. There are a number of us now calling for an independent public inquiry.
No one from the government would be interviewed, but the statement from the Treasury said recent analysis showed changing the system used by Northumbrian Water would not save any money and would undermine the competitiveness of the British economy. Mr. Lee's determination to pay much tax isn't just a UK thing. He has several utilities down under, and in 2013 the Australian courts ruled he should pay back hundreds of millions of dollars in unpaid tax. Now, according to Mr. Lee's website, half has been paid, but he's still in a dispute about whether any money is actually due at all. This isn't small beer. Mr. Li doesn't give a 4x about paying a single penny more in tax than he legally has to. But is the amount of tax that Li Ka-Shing pays something that bothers us?
I would be unhappy about, because I'm unhappy about that with other big corporations that sort of have businesses within the UK.
We pay taxes for everything, so why shouldn't they? It should be transparent. You should be able to know about everything what goes on.
And what about the organisation that represents the customers' interests?
If customers have concerns about any company's tax arrangements, they should be able to go and find out exactly what arrangements the company has.
But you know that they're lending themselves money from a tax haven.
Oh, I'm not aware of that level of detail around their finance.
Isn't that something you think customers should know about?
Well, that is an issue for others to be looking at. We are the economic regulator. My concern is around customers' views.
But do you think that the consumer therefore is wise enough and well educated enough about how it all works, or should they not care?
I'm not sure what consumers are aware of, but you guys in the media, you do lots of awareness raising around these issues, I'm sure.
No one from Northumbrian Water would be interviewed, but in a statement they told us that the company always acts transparently and within the letter and spirit of the law. It added that Northumbrian Water is not in dispute with HMRC on its tax fares. The fact is, most UK utilities are owned by individuals and companies dotted around the world. Many, if not most, are using similar loopholes to legally avoid paying tax. The question is, to what extent do we care when we pay the bill?
If you've any thoughts on any of the stories we cover each week, then why not share them? If you're on Twitter, use my hashtag InsideOutCJ.